I'm dubious that you will have that answer at the moment that this episode comes out. But if we do, then we can consider ourselves lucky. I don't know if we'll ever get back to knowing the outcome of an election by the time we go to bed on election night. I don't know if that's ever going to happen again. Maybe it will. I'm hoping that it happens this year. But if I'm wrong, that's okay, because everything I'm going to say here today applies either way, regardless who won, or regardless of if we even know who won. So keep these points in mind for when we do find out the results, if you don't already know, or contrary to my prediction, maybe we already know the outcome by the time you hear this. Point number one. Topic, once again, is the election is over. Now, what do we do? Number one, if your person won, if the person who you voted for, or the person who you support, or the person who you strongly wanted to win did actually win. All right, here's what I say to you. First of all, congratulations, I guess. I guess you can get congratulations. I mean, you didn't do anything. Maybe you campaigned for them. Maybe you knocked on some doors. Maybe you wore a t-shirt. Maybe you voted for the person. Maybe you're a big fan of them. But, I mean, what are you really congratulating yourself for, unless you happen to work in the government? Okay? You're not actually working for that party, and you're not about to be part of the administration itself, and you're not on the payroll, all right, don't have a vision of being on the payroll, all right, your candidate winning that election is not much different than your favorite football team winning the Super Bowl. I mean, it feels good. You can use the term we as if you are a part of the team, but ultimately, once the celebration and the euphoria wears off, you are going to realize that you are indeed on the outside looking in. Okay, so I'm saying this to those of you who have pulled for a certain candidate, voted for, knocked on doors for, went to rallies for, bought t-shirts, and are a big supporter of a certain candidate. Unless you're on the payroll and on the team, you are just like a fan cheering because your football team won. All right, you ain't really on the team. All right, just a glass of cold water being thrown in your face. You're not even drinking it. I'm throwing it in your face. Like if you saw the Wolf of Wall Street movie, how the wife kept throwing the glass of water on, what's the guy's name? The actual Jordan Belfort. She kept throwing a glass of water in his face because he would be high off drugs, and she wanted to wake him up. She was mad at him. All right, that's what I'm doing to you. I'm throwing a glass of cold water in your face to wake you the hell up. All right, you ain't on the team. Okay, the goal of political campaigning, folks, is to make everyone feel as if they are on the team when you're actually not. All right, that's sales. That's all it is. Political campaigning is selling, and their job is to sell you the concept that you are part of the team. So if and when that team wins, you can feel great as if you actually won too. Again, the same way if you cheer for the Dallas Cowboys and they win the Super Bowl, you feel like you won the Super Bowl because you cheer for the Dallas Cowboys or whatever your hometown sports team is. All right, unless you're on the roster, you didn't win shit. Okay, you watched and you cheered, or you are a fan. Nothing wrong with being a fan, but you ain't on the team. That's the difference between being a fan and being a player. All right, most of what your candidates promise, and they do a great job of selling people on this concept that they're on the team, most of what your candidate promises is either not going to happen, it won't happen, or it won't happen the way they said it was going to happen, or it won't happen as quickly as they said it would happen, or it's going to come with some unspoken costs that they didn't tell you about during the campaign. Usually all four. Usually all of those are going to happen. It either won't happen at all, it won't happen how they said it would, it won't happen as fast as they said it would, or there are unspoken costs that they didn't tell you about in the fine print. There was fine print, but they didn't tell you to read the fine print, and you didn't bother to read the fine print. That's usually what happens with campaign promises. By the way, just so any of you knows anything your favorite candidate has ever promised, you notice that one of these four things usually apply. So 4 years from now, guess what? You will likely be hoping for something different than what your candidate who just won has promised you. So even if they do the stuff they said they were going to do and they won, you'll be hoping that they do something other than that 4 years from now. You're not going to say, all right, everything you did before, you did, I'm comfortable with things being exactly as they are. No, you're going to have a whole new set of demands, even if you want the same person to run again, or if they're not going to run, you're going to have a whole new set of demands for whoever the new person is who is vying to take their spot. This is just how it works. This is just human nature, everything that I'm explaining here. Okay, so let me remind you, and I will remind you more as we continue through this very episode. You do not want to be in a position of depending on a politician. I don't care who that politician is, and I don't care what they have promised. I don't care what party they represent. You do not want to be in the position of depending on a politician for anything. Why is this? Because I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that as we get further into this episode, but just keep in mind that the United States government, in the United States, the government is not designed to help people who are capable of helping themselves. So if you're capable of helping yourself, politicians do not help you. They do not give you anything. They take from you. Whatever they give you, quote unquote, give you, or they're taking more back from you in ways that either you know about or don't know about, but ain't nothing given to you. The United States government is trillions of dollars in debt. They don't have the resources to give you anything. Keep that in mind. Okay, just hold that thought as we move on in this episode here today. Again, I don't mind if you want to be a fan or a supporter or even a donator to any candidate, and if you already are, cool. But you don't want to be depending on that candidate no matter what they say, because as I've already told you, by design, politicians are liars. Now, you could not successfully win an election in the United States without telling lies. Lies by omission, lies via propaganda, or just picking, and propaganda basically encompasses all of it. Taking facts out of context, telling straight up lies, or telling half truths. All right, all those are forms of propaganda. Every politician participates in it because, again, it's impossible to persuade millions of people without using propaganda. Because if you just told millions of people the actual truth, you wouldn't have enough people liking you in order for you to even come close to winning an election. Moving on, point number 2. Today's topic, once again, the election is over. At least we think it may be over. Now, what do you do next? Number 2, let's say your candidate lost. So in the first point, I told you what to do if your chosen candidate won the election. Now let me tell you what to do if your candidate lost the election. Now, depending on how invested you were in that person's success, perhaps you are very disappointed. Maybe you are anxious because you don't know what the other person is going to do. Maybe even nervous about what that other person may do. And maybe you're just pissed off because you were openly supporting the candidate who didn't win. And now you're a defeated candidate. Now you, as a supporter of the defeated candidate, has to go listen to people who supported the winning candidate. And they're going to tease you, talk bad about you, give you side eyes, smirk at you, make sarcastic comments, etc. And you have to look at the other candidate who you didn't vote for running things in America for the next 4 years. And that really pisses you off, just the very thought of it happening. All right, I will suggest that you not be so emotionally engaged in this outcome, because all the politicians, all of them, regardless of their political party, they're all in on the same scheme, and they are all ultimately working on the same team. Let me repeat. All those politicians, regardless of what side they're on, whether they're the red or the blue, does not matter. They are all in on the same scheme, and they are all ultimately working on the same team. And let me remind you, that team, you ain't on it. All right, just to remind you again. Democrats versus Republicans, ladies and gentlemen, is simply a show that the government puts on to make everyday citizens, voters, and taxpayers feel as if you have some say in the political process, as if there's really a struggle for power between these two entities. All right, that's a show. It's all a show, and it's all just to get everyday people excited and feeling as if they really have some power in how things go around here, that is in the United States of America. Okay? Truth of the matter is, they all have an equal amount of power regardless of who wins. They have an equal amount of power regardless of who wins. People who really run the government are not the people you see on TV, giving speeches, posting on social media, going out, shaking hands at campaign events. They are not the ones who run the country. The president is, for the most part, a figurehead. That's what the United States, president of the United States, is for the most part a figurehead. The people who really run the government, you don't know them. You don't know their names. You don't know their faces. If they walk by you in the grocery store, you wouldn't know it was them. All right. The people whose names you know, they are the dancing monkeys, as we say, who allow citizens to put a face to their groups. All right. So the person who wins the presidency or runs for the Republicans or the Democrats, yes, they get known, they get money, they have name recognition. They'll probably be able to get free meals and go to a whole lot of places for the rest of their lives because they were the face of a party for at least a brief period of time. All right, they are dancing monkeys who, again, are just the face of a thing. If you knows anything about business, you know that sometimes in a business, there is one person who's the face of the business. Everybody sees them and knows them, and people tend to associate the business itself with that individual. But the person who's really running things and maybe making the bulk of the money might be a person who you don't even know. You don't know their name. They're not on social media. They're not showing off who they are. They don't have their name publicly in any way attached to the business, but they're the one who's actually running everything. While the person with the face is just getting the check, but they're not even running the show. But you think they are because that's the person you see. That's the way the government works. People you see on TV are not the ones running the show. And actually, sometimes you do see the people on TV who are running the show, but see, they're not the person who the show is about. The show is about the person who's the dancing monkey. All right, those are your nominees. All right, those are the dancing monkeys. People really running things, you don't know them. And you never will. And they design it that way. Okay? So the real loser in every election is the voter who thinks that the outcome of the election really is going to make a big difference in your life. So the loser in the election is not the person who got fewer votes. The loser in the election is not the person who supported the person who got fewer votes. The loser in the election is the person who thinks that whatever happens in the election is going to play a big role in the betterment or the worsening of your particular life situation. Or you are the one losing because you have been fed a false idea. You've been fed a bill of goods that are not true. It's just not true. Now, yes, I do understand that certain bills, laws, and tax codes do change in different ways depending on who's in charge. So, is there going to be some difference in what will happen with your taxes depending on if the Democrat or the Republican wins? Yes. Is there some difference in who gets appointed to the Supreme Court? Yes. Is there some difference maybe in how people feel in general based on who's in charge, what they say, and what they do? Also, yes. All right. But the government, that outcome for the politician, and that's the government, has the most effect on people who will be affected no matter what happens. The most effect, the biggest effect and impact of the election on people happens to people who will be affected regardless of who wins. Meaning it doesn't matter if the Democrat or Republican wins because they're still in a certain situation in which whatever's happening with the government impacts them the most. And if you don't understand what I'm saying here, let me make it very clear. These are for the people who live at the bottom of the pyramid. If you live at the bottom of the pyramid, you're on government assistance and you are in need of assistance from the government just so you can provide food, clothing, shelter for yourself and to your family, you are deeply affected by whatever the government does, regardless of whether the Democrat or the Republican wins an election, because you are dependent on the government. So it really doesn't matter who's running it, does it? Because you're dependent on them either way. Those are the people most affected, not you, everyday person who buys every new iPhone and you earn, let's say, at least minimum salary, not minimum, excuse me, median salary in America, which is somewhere between $45,000 and $50,000 a year. All right, you are not the one most impacted by anything that happens with the government. I'm not saying you're not impacted at all, but you're not the one who is most impacted. And I would suggest that you strive to get yourself into a position where you are not impacted hardly at all by what the government does. And everyone gets some effect because if you live here, the government does something that has some effect on you. I'm saying in a relative sense, you want it to have as little impact on your decisions in your daily life as possible. If it controls all your decisions in your daily life, then it doesn't matter who wins. I mean, is one of them going to get you out of that situation? Is one of them going to keep you in it? No, you're stuck there either way. Everybody follow what I'm saying? So your real goal is to not be amongst the group that is most affected by anything the government does, decides, does, but doesn't do, or anything in between. I'll tell you in the next point who it does make a difference for and how. Let's move on to point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is the election is over. At least we think it's over. Now, what do you do next? And again, I'm recording this before we even know who won. I'm recording this before the election day even happens. So whoever won, or if you know who won, doesn't even matter. These points still apply. Number 3, the government is not your friend. The government is not your friend. I believe it was Ronald Reagan who's credited with the statement that the worst thing you ever want to hear is, we're from the government and we're here to help. Let me say that phrase again. All right, this is a phrase you never want to hear again. Open quote. We are from the government and we are here to help. Period, close quote. All right, you don't want the government showing up anywhere you are saying, we're from the government and we're here to help. All right, because the government, they tend to mess up things that they get their hands on. All right, the United States Postal Service. Everybody familiar with them? The USPS? USPS is a monopoly. They have a monopoly on mail. Now, of course, there are other ways to send mail. You got DHL, you got FedEx, you got, what's the other one? UPS. There's other different ways to send mail, but and we're talking about just general mail. The United States Postal Service has a monopoly on mail. And guess what? They messed that up. All right, the United States Postal Service tends to not really make that much money. They don't do that well as a business, even though they have a complete monopoly on business. Why? Because it's run by the government, and the government is very inefficient with running anything, especially anything that involves money. How do we know this? The United States government is trillions of dollars in debt. There is a website called the US Debt Clock. I believe it's .org. Just look up US Debt Clock and it'll come up. Debt, D-E-B-T, US Debt Clock. And it tells you to the second how many dollars in debt the United States government is in. And the numbers just keep going and going and going and going and going like a slot machine. It never stops. It never pauses on one number. So in the time that it took me to explain that to you, the United States has added another $10,000 in debt to its deficit. Now you want to talk about a fact. There's a fact for you right there. And every administration, the government goes further and further in debt. All the politicians argue about is, well, this guy added 10 trillion in debt. We only added 5 trillion. So we're not as bad as that guy. We're only half as bad as him. You added $5 trillion in debt. All right, how are you good? And And again, every administration does this. Every administration does this. The only people making money from the government are those who work in the government and or are closely attached to the government. In other words, like companies that make war materials, they make a lot of money from the government because the United States is perpetually getting involved in something that involves war. And every time the United States gets involved in war, what happens is they need equipment for war. And the companies that make war equipment make a ton of money through the United States being involved in war all the time. Some people call this the military industrial complex. There's a whole process of just keeping us involved in some type of war, because the more wars we're in, the more tanks and bombs and missiles we need. And those tanks and bombs and missiles get made by companies that have contracts with the U.S. government. And those companies make millions of dollars hand over fist as long as we're in war, because they got to keep making equipment. So when the United States Congress passes a bill to send another $10 million over to Ukraine, where's that money going? What is Ukraine doing with the money? Are Ukrainians just walking around with a bunch of money falling out of their pockets? No. What's happening is Ukraine then turns around and takes that same money and they pay United States military industrial companies to design bombs and tanks and missiles and airplanes for them. And this is all part of the contract. So when the United States Congress votes to give $10 million to Ukraine, the fine print of that document says this $10 million must be spent on these particular companies that happen to be U.S. companies, and they're going to make the material for you. So it's really the government writing a contract to send money to basically their friends over in the military industrial space. And guess what? Some of those Congress people, they're getting kickbacks from those deals. That's how the government is actually working, in case any of you didn't know. And I'm going very, very high level on this, that people have written entire books on this concept. I'm very, very scratching the surface of how it actually works. You can dig into this stuff if you wish, but that's the general idea. Okay, this is why I'm saying, and lobbyists is another one. I've explained to you how lobbyists work in the past. There are lobbyists out there who, for the 2024 election, let's use this as an example, they may give $1 million to the Democratic candidate and they'll give $1 million to the Republican candidate. So that may make you wonder, well, what side are they on? Well, not on either side. They're on their own side. They're on their own side. They give $1 million to each candidate. And with that $1 million, they say to that candidate, hey, Mr. Candidate or Mrs. Candidate, if your side wins, can I count on you to make sure that you pass legislation that allows my company that I'm a lobbyist for? That's what a lobbyist is a person who works in DC to get laws and rules made in the favor of the company that they work for. That's what a lobbyist is. Can I count on you to make sure that you pass legislation to allow our company to keep doing what we're doing so we can keep making money, or to block any legislation that would stop us from doing what we're doing so that we can keep making money? They get a wink, wink promise from the candidate, and whichever one wins, they'll consider the other $1 million a tax write-off, and the $1 million that they gave to the winner, they consider that, hey, now I got this person in my pocket, and they're going to help us out so we can keep doing business. This is how the United States government in Washington, D.C. actually works. All right, so any of you who thought it was just about the power of the people and we're just going to do what the people want and whatever the people vote for, that's what us government folks do. No, that's what you learned in elementary school is bullshit. That's not how it works. This is what really goes on. And again, I'm super high level on this. You can go way deeper than what I'm talking about. All of this is why the government has become a career for people when it was designed as a public service. I talked about this in the episode where I explained why I believe Trump might win, or where I explained why Trump would win if he wins. That's a better way of saying it. I did 2 episodes, one why Kamala will win, one why Trump will win. In the Trump episode, I said a lot of Americans are tired of career politicians because we know that we can't trust them. And why would someone work in a public service for a career? That's not really what it's designed to be. It's designed to be a springboard or a launching pad or just something that you do as a way of giving to the community, not as something that you aspire to do as a career. That's not a thing you aspire to do as a career, is to be in public service, not through the government. That's not what the government was designed for. The government was designed for people who already had other things going on in life to donate a little bit of their time and resources to government to help govern the people. And the government was by the people and for the people. Is that what the government is for now? Is that how the government is now? Do you feel like the United States government is by the people and for the people? Hell no, it's not. Whether you think it or not, it ain't. That's not what it is. And again, there are people who are in the government for an entire career. How you build an entire career in the government? It's like being a volunteer baseball coach for an entire career. That's not a thing. All right, you have another career, some other thing that you do, and then you volunteer as a baseball coach kind of on the side because you can't build a career just doing that because it don't pay. That's what the government was designed to be like. Is that what it does? No. See, people stay in the government because of their connection to money and power. That's what the government is these days. But at the same time, I just told you the government's broke. The government is trillions of dollars in debt. It's not even broke, it's in debt. And at the same time, we're all those dollars in debt and we go deeper and deeper every day. How then, Dre, do you explain calling being the government a connection to money and power if the government is not making any money? It's actually losing money and is bad with managing money and is bad at creating money. So how would someone working in government have connection to money and power? That's a great question. Let me answer it. Two things. One is your money in the form of tax dollars gets spent and spread around the government. They're not using that money to pay down the debt because we keep going further and further in debt. And two, even bigger, is the government working with what is called the Federal Reserve Bank to literally create money out of nowhere. So in case any of you didn't know, the Federal Reserve Bank is not federal. There are no reserves, and it is not a bank. The Federal Reserve Bank is not federal, meaning it is not part of the government. There are no reserves, meaning there is no gold in the Federal Reserve Bank. And that's what we use. Our dollars used to be backed by gold before we came off the gold standard, before I was even born. And the Federal Reserve Bank is not actually a bank. It's just a bunch of people making decisions about money. They're not really a bank. And the Federal Reserve Bank has the ability to create money out of nowhere. They literally print money. And when more money goes into circulation, again, I'm keeping this very high level, what happens is what all of you are familiar with is called inflation. When there's more money in circulation, prices go up because there's more money around. So companies simply raise prices. And this happens across all industries. This is why it costs more to go to the movies now than it did when your grandma was a kid. Because we keep printing money. And because the cost of living goes up, the cost of inflation goes up, the cost of life goes up. Everything costs more. So this is why every election cycle you see the politicians arguing about, man, it costs so much money to live. And I know everyday people who can't take care of the kids and they can't pay for childcare and they can't put gas in their cars and eggs cost so much money. Every election they're talking about this because every election is an issue. Why? Because the Federal Reserve keeps printing money. Why does the Federal Reserve keep printing money? Because the government doesn't have any. And if it doesn't print money, we will go into default and there will be chaos because nobody will have any money. And those dollars that you have in your pocket or those numbers that you have in a bank account on an app on your phone will mean literally nothing because they are backed by, guess what? Literally nothing. You open up one of the apps on your phone, it tells you how much money you have. That money is backed by nothing. It is only backed by the faith that you and I have in the American economic system. If we lose faith, those numbers mean absolutely nothing. They're not backed by anything right now, but they mean something because we believe in it. But if we lose belief, we lose faith, it's over. And there will be real chaos. So you want to see real chaos and anarchy? Let that happen. That's what would happen if the Federal Reserve stopped printing money. The problem is the more money they print, the higher costs go. So you see how this is like a catch-22? Or no matter what happens, you're fucked. No matter what happens, you're screwed. And when I say you, I mean everyday citizen, including myself. So what I'm saying is that the ultimate thing here is what I just told you earlier in this point. You don't want to be in a position where you're depending on the government because I just told you why you don't want to depend on the government. We're already dependent on the government. They keep printing money and they're just making the situation worse. You need to get far above the fray so that it's not affecting you. Everybody catch everything that I said there? So working in the government means you're close to the people who have a license to print and collect printed money. That's how the government works. I'm saying all this to say that the government's not here to help you. So if you think you're voting for somebody because it's going to help you out, no, it's not. So don't get excited about who wins an election unless it happens to be a local election. Now, in local elections, people could actually do real work to actually help you in real life. Local elections, like your community activists, or I get emails from the governor of Miami Beach like every week telling me what's happening and what they're working on and what they're going to do next. Those people can do real work, but on the federal level, no, they're not doing anything. Not for you, they're not. They're doing something for themselves, but not for you. So if you happen to be related to a person who won the election, you could get excited. But other than that, this ain't for you. Is you could get some of that money yourself. You're connected to that person, but otherwise you're screwed if you're not in the government. I don't care who wins. All that said, let's recap today's class, which is election is over. Now what? And again, I'm recording this almost a month before the election, but this is assuming that the election did happen yesterday, and maybe we have an outcome, maybe we don't. Either way, these points still apply. Number one, if your person won, I guess congratulations, but if you're not actually working for the party, you're not going to be on the payroll, you can celebrate the same way you would celebrate if your favorite football team won the championship. You ain't getting shit. You ain't getting a ring. You ain't on the team. All right, calm down. Point number two, if your chosen candidate lost, depending on how invested you were in that person winning, perhaps you are disappointed, anxious, maybe even nervous about what the other person is going to do. But I suggest you not be, because they're all on the same scheme, on the same team, and none of that team gives a damn about doing anything to help you. Democrats versus Republican is nothing but a show to keep the everyday person entertained. It doesn't really matter because they are all making money hand over fist on the backs of everyday citizens. It doesn't matter what side is quote unquote in power. They're all in power. Who's not in power is the everyday person. Number three, the government is not your friend. All right, the worst statement you will ever hear is that we're from the government and we're here to help. The government is not good at helping anything. They fumbled the monopoly that they have, the U.S. Postal Service. They fumbled all the trust that they've gotten from the American citizens. We are trillions of dollars in debt, and we've added another $1 million in debt just in the time it took me to record this episode. All right, that's how much debt the United States government is in, actually several million in the time it took me to record this episode. And the government is not capable of helping you make more money. It can't even help itself make money. How is it going to help you? If it can't help itself, how is it going to help you? Oh, you think you're going to get a tax credit? Here's the thing, okay? Every credit that you get from the government, you're paying for it in another way that maybe you don't see or you're not aware of. The biggest tax that you pay is not the taxes that you pay to the IRS on the 15th of April every year. It is the inflation that you pay for the increased cost of living life, which continues to happen because the Federal Reserve keeps printing money because the United States government does not have any money, and the money that you have in your wallet or the numbers on your bank account mean absolutely nothing if we lose faith in the US dollar, which is backed by literally nothing but blind faith. Okay, I'm telling you all that to say the government is not here to help you. Don't get excited about anything happening with the government. You can watch, you can have opinions, you can talk about it, as I have, but do not get emotionally engaged in this stuff. You need to focus on what's happening in your house, not the White House. All that said, folks, make sure you go to workonyourgameuniversity.com so we can start focusing on what's happening in your house and get your house where it needs to be with my direct help. That's all at workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre, all